Welcome to the Bhandwagon Podcast. And today is what I would say is one of those people who really helped me over the last sort of 18 months, I would say, based on their, I just bumped into their Instagram following, and then I was like literally kind of obsessed with them. So it's Dr. Core Therapy, which is the account name on Instagram, which I want you to, everybody at this point, just go and subscribe and follow, like, share, whatever you need to do. And it's Dr. Gurpreet Kaur, who owns the account, who's joined me today, who's a Chartered Clinical Psychologist, which basically means she's much more clever than me. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation and very enlightening. Welcome, Gurpreet.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, we've been back and forth. I think it was again one of me where I've missed a date or something like that, and I
think it was COVID related, wasn't it? Hit you.
I think I've had COVID in the family about 3 times now. I think the kids have had it 3 times. So and it just once it's in, it's hard to just shake it out.
Yeah, completely not good.
So we might as well just jump in straight away in there. In terms of like the experience in terms of the last 18 months, coming up to 2 years, I followed your account, especially when people were really struggling with their mental health, being based at home. Did you find an increase in terms of your engagement or the work that you were involved in increasing at that time?
I think referrals have always been coming, steadily through, but I think absolutely mental health issues were completely increasing around kind of COVID, pandemic, lockdown. And it was interesting because I saw a lot of referrals for people who are struggling in relationships. So a lot of the issues I think that were probably suppressed before or being dealt with before were managed because people were going out and they were getting on with their lives and they were interacting and getting to do other things. And obviously removing all of that meant that they were just faced with the problem. So it definitely increased the referrals for relationship difficulties. And I saw really a sharp increase for young people. So young people massively struggled during lockdown. It was getting to a point where I just couldn't see everyone who was coming through, and it felt awful for me because I saw a lot of people who were struggling massively, and we're talking about self-harming. And I literally, all the local psychologists were full, and there was no one to refer these young people to. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And that's the problem, I think, with the NHS at the time as well, and that young people literally had to be saying, "I want to end my life," before they were seen. It was really, the risk level was quite high, but they still weren't really being accepted into services. So it was a really, really difficult time for me as well to be able to realize that there's such a limit with what I can do and who I can help as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a huge increase at the time.
Yeah, my background is from a kind of a substance misuse kind of background, where working in commissioning in public health as well. Yeah. What I started to get, even myself, getting some phone calls of trying to help people increase drinking, especially around of wave 1, for example, where people are drinking a lot more from home. The Zoom pressure. I remember one stage someone was coming in. They were funding. They called it the Zoom smiles with the dentistry, trying to get better looking teeth on there, saving up money, but was also drinking away that money at the same time. There was this weird kind of nuance of pressure that was coming in. You've talked about self-harm. You talked about young people in there. What and relationship. Was there any other themes that started to emerge from one? Because I've just given you one there in terms of alcohol. Was there anything else that was being missed?
If anything, it's quite interesting. I don't really advertise myself as like a therapist for South Asian people, but I think that's, if I'm thinking back, that's probably where my referrals from South Asian people were also increasing. And from men in particular. And so themes like, unhelpful coping strategies, I suppose, were coming in. So a lot of men who struggled with porn use, a lot of men who struggled with absolutely alcoholism, drug use. I think that was the thing that was really, really increasing, but also from women who, again, were struggling in their marriages, were struggling in their identity as, who am I as a professional, as a mum, as a carer for in-laws or all of that. It was a lot of kind of referrals coming through from our own community, not necessarily just Punjabi community. It was kind of across board with South Asian referrals. So yeah, I think lockdown just hit a point, didn't it, for people, where it just removed a lot of the coping strategies for people. And when the distraction is taken away, or when the coping is taken away through the external stimulation, and they're left with the core problem, I think in desperation, absolutely, it happened for a lot of people, and people started to seek therapy. But I think that it was a good thing, because therapy and accessing therapy has also been massively normalized now over the last couple of years. So since I've been on, gosh, I can't even remember since I've been on, how long it's been since I started on Instagram, but it's been a couple of years now. And it was hard. The reason I came onto it was because actually this stuff wasn't really being spoken about, especially in our own community. And I think it's just massively increased. The awareness of mental health has massively increased. Now I'm aware that I'm a therapist and I only see what is being out there, and I don't know what that experience is like for the average South Asian person who's not necessarily into therapy, and what accounts they're coming across. But I know objectively there's so much more information out there now, and that's available. So I think it was kind of aligning to the fact that there was a need, but there was also access to, how do I get help? And oh, look, this stuff is out there, and maybe therapy can help me.
I've got so many different, everything that you say is so loaded in terms of different avenues to go down to. So I want to try and blend both of it in terms of kind of your experience, your introduction into the field, and then some particular areas that I just want to kind of go into, if that's all right. I mean, a clinical psychologist is not the traditional kind of route at that time where people might go into kind of red brick kind of courses, they say, at university, or kind of pathways. This is so specialized in what it is. And I don't want to keep relating it back to me, but I went through I did a politics degree, which is not the most sort of common pathway to do it. What inspired you to go down this road to start off with?
Oh, I really want to say,
I just lost you there. So I'll just go back to the question. What really inspires you to go down this road?
I want to say something quite profound, but it's not, other than I just wanted to help people. And, I wasn't from a background, I come from a working class family background. My parents worked really, really hard all their lives, and there wasn't a massive push on education. And I kind of just figured it out along the way. I didn't even know if I was going to go to college, but my mates were, so I went. And then it was the same thing with university. And I fell into psychology. So it started off at psychology, just psychology degree. And one thing I knew is that I didn't want to do a psychology degree and then come out of uni and then do something completely different. I wanted to do something related to psychology. I didn't know what at the time. And it was only when I went to a careers advisor at that stage, and we're talking, years ago now, almost literally like decades, but it was her that told me, oh, there's this path that exists where you can go and apply your psychology skills and, do this career in it. I knew nothing about it at the time. And it was kind of just learning as I went, to be honest. I did a master's after my degree, went back home. I did practical jobs to get really hands-on experience with people who were struggling. So a lot of support work posts, a couple of assistant psychologist posts. And it was along the way that I learned, and I kept learning, like, what is it that I need to do? What is it that this is about? And what can I do? And then I got into, a good course and kind of learned along the way. So it's just the need for me to absolutely want to help people, because one thing I knew about myself was that I didn't want to go into business or computing, or that stuff just didn't appeal, or law, or that traditional kind of stuff. And as I said, I think I didn't have a massive push from my parents or family to do any of that. If anything, they just supported me with my choices, which I know is unique, I suppose, for life. I didn't have that same pressure, and I'm massively thankful to my parents for that. And so it's just figuring it out. And I think, personal experience, the reason I was just pausing there was thinking about, actually, from a personal perspective, I have a family member who struggled in terms of their mental health. And I got exposure. I saw how unbelievably terrible the support was, especially for, now looking back, I can see, actually, especially for us as South Asians. At the time, I didn't realize that actually as a South Asian, we just weren't getting that much support. So that, I suppose, helped me as well to think that actually this is what I want to do. I want to go and help people who are struggling, because there's such a gap there. There's such a need for people who are struggling with their mental health.
I don't mean the question with any malice or anything like that, but was there a conscious decision that you wanted to kind of go into working with the South Asian community especially, or did you want to keep it more generic and mainstream and have the South Asian community incorporated in your work? Does that make...
Why not malice? What do you mean by not malice? I don't interpret malice from that question.
Yeah, no, because I think sometimes where it's something to do with the post that you came out, which was going to come later on, which was that I think when I was working within the commissioning side and when trying to provide help, and you'd find, let's say, Punjabi Sikh organizations or charities really working in a particular area or hoarding kind of information, you'd get charlatans coming in who are like scam artists who are basically trying to exploit vulnerable families for addictions or anything like that, or fake Bobby or anything like going from that side. And you'd always get, I mean, I felt it, maybe it was just a personal thing, that it was really difficult trying to say that, you know, if you need help, you know, if you break a leg, you don't go to kind of a Sikh hospital. You'll go to a hospital. It's a universal precaution. It's a universal kind of service.
Yeah.
And I always tried to find myself to kind of bring in the community, the bridge between that separation, isolation, to come in, because I ultimately knew that services had no money. The cultural aspect to have some of those kind of religion specific community workers there wasn't always going to happen at that time. And so what I meant by the malice bit was to say that I didn't want to come from a bit. Did you feel like that you were given an impression where you were exploiting the market, or were you able to try and bring everybody in more inclusive?
I think it's always been about inclusivity to me. I've never, and even now, I don't actually advertise myself as a South Asian therapist. I don't target the South Asian. Yeah. I think there's dukh, you know, there's pain everywhere. And if anything, my Sikhi teaches me that everyone's in pain. And if people want to come to me and I can help them with whatever that is, then that's my focus. And I think absolutely, I've always been pulled, I suppose, towards people who maybe identify themselves as minorities, whether that's refugees, whether that's people, you know, who are struggling with their own identity. Maybe it's because of low confidence. Maybe it's because of their South Asian background. Maybe it's people who've come from abroad from a different country and you know, they want to kind of get help with that. Maybe it's a woman who struggles because she feels like a minority. I've always had that pull to help people who feel less than. So I think that's the impact of being a minority in this country, certainly one that I've, you know, been able to relate to. So I don't advertise myself as someone who will only focus on a certain group. I see myself as working more inclusively with anybody who wants to come to me who struggles with issues, maybe with being a minority. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I think maybe I did. I think this is going to turn into a session, but like in terms of trying to like clinical supervision, you know, when you kind of phrasing it in there, it's probably kind of the own experience that I had, that I was getting, you know, anybody who was from a coloured background, I was just getting literally like, oh yeah, you can go and deal with that, because I was from a ethnic background, you know, to try and engage with communities.
Oh, so you were told to go and work with those clients?
Yeah, because it was, you know, I was more relatable kind of thing. I didn't know whether that's kind of a singular kind of position, because every time I do speak with people in various bits, it was like, oh, it almost became kind of tick box kind of thing, and you're like, no, I've earned my place to be here. I'm not just a specialist just to be speaking with people from different backgrounds. I've earned the right to be on the table to speak that. And it was just, you know, from your experience from there, what you've said, you know, it's just that I could see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I don't think I had that issue in workplaces, if I'm honest. I never really had that focus on me. Probably a little bit as an assistant psychologist, told to go and see certain clients who were from a Punjabi Sikh, you know, South Asian background, probably a little bit then, but not massively, if I'm honest, in the NHS since then. I think I missed that period because I completely left. I worked in the NHS since 2001, and I left probably early lockdown.
Right.
Went fully into private practice at the time, and I think that's around that kind of you know, all the race issues really came to the forefront, didn't they, during lockdown with everything that was happening. And I think a lot of people experienced that in the workplace at that time, that if they were South Asian or if they were from a minority group, that they would be the ones who would go to speak up on this and inform the team about how to work with this. And so I think I missed all of that, but yeah, not massively otherwise.
Through your learning, and especially when you're going through looking at psychology in depth, did it give you a different perspective of with your own peers and all your friends and family around understanding behaviors? And how did you kind of safeguard yourself from always being in that mind frame?
Oh, such an interesting question. I love my job because I get to learn, because I get to constantly learn about theories or enrich my own knowledge about it. Inevitably, you're going to have that lens. It's just inevitable, I think, especially because I work as a trauma therapist, so I work massively with this idea that actually, it's about your experiences that have caused you a problem, that have caused you some level of real difficulty that is stopping your functioning. And so as a trauma therapist, I always take what we call like a longitudinal perspective of some of these difficulties. I look at history, I look at the background, I look at attachment, I look at intergenerational trauma, I kind of look at all of that, and then I understand the person's problem. I don't really stick with just the here and now, because I think that's, for me, I'm not seeing that be as effective in terms of the clinical work. So inevitably, when I am surrounded by family or friends, that's just your lens, you just develop a lens. And I don't think there's much protecting needed. I think it's just about enhancing your knowledge and understanding about things that are happening around you. If anything, it can help. It can help broaden your perspective of actually why someone's acting that way, or why someone is behaving in a certain way that isn't like conducive to the best environment. So if anything, I think it's helpful for me.
How do you I was last night I was thinking about the podcast today, and I was like going even talking therapies within, I want to kind of drill a little bit and focus on a little bit of South Asian from them. Talking therapies, is this a new concept to South Asian community? I mean, like within a wedding, within a social, we're fantastic. Everyone's all gossiping, everything's all within there. But clinically, in terms of like talking therapies, how is this a new concept that's working, and is it evolving quickly to be accepted?
What do you think? What's your experience of that? Do you think in your social settings that you are noticing a change in people talking about mental health?
Yes, I do see, especially within my peers and younger, you do hear the words mental health being talked quite a lot. In some aspects, I do believe sometimes it's used to justify poor behavior, even though I don't believe that there's within an issue within that. I think now the keywords such as depression, you might hear the older generation starting to talk about it. They'll always reflect back in our day. We never used to have these things and around that. And that's where I was saying, like, the evolution of the word trauma, for example. If you look at the older generation coming in, you had partition, coming over to this country, suffering huge racism, depending on your religious beliefs, happening 84, anything like that. Various significant points of trauma. I mean, it has a different meaning for different people. So I do see overall that it's becoming more and more accepted. And from an addictions point of view, when I was working in the drug and alcohol field, I still see that a little bit of a gap there, where earlier on in my career, I could say, people don't engage because of language problems. Well, everyone in my generation now can't hardly speak Punjabi, so I can't really accept that as an answer anymore. And then I look back and say, well, okay, what is it, the stigma and taboo? Well, looking on social media, people are just doing everything and anything. I think like everything's off. And so I'm like, the boundaries are changing. I understand that from there, but I do still think that there's a really big gap in terms of bringing people from different backgrounds, or even my friends, into more of a talking therapy environment. I don't know if I've answered the question in that way. It's just been more of a statement in terms of what I'm saying from there.
I think it is still an issue. I think stigma does still exist. That's the problem. Certainly not to the same extent. I think you're completely right with that. We're in a changing time, aren't we? Where actually, there's so much information, especially to the younger generation, or middle-aged generation, where we've got a little bit more access to it. But to be able to go and say to your mum or your dad, or my mum, whoever, or your grandparents, actually, I'm seeing a therapist. What? It doesn't make sense for the reasons that you said. It's like, well, look what we've been through. Look at all this stuff that we've been through, and now you're upset because, I don't know, someone bullied you at school. It doesn't make sense. There's a mismatch there. So there is still stigma. There is still stigma about talking about it openly in communities. But and this is another issue, isn't it? It's actually a lot of people think that something very big and traumatic in the ways that you described, all of those things that you described that have affected our community, they look obviously traumatic. It's so easy to say that these things would have been massively traumatic. They were huge, of course they were, and there were levels of trauma in there that would have affected people. Yeah. But what we know about trauma is that it's not the thing, it's not the event, it's the impact it has on the individual person internally. And that is going to be based on their personality and their experience and their family and their messages that they've soaked up about themselves in the world. So it's going to affect everybody differently. But yeah, the mismatch is absolutely still there. Stigma is still there to some extent. Also, the shame that people hold themselves. Like, there's something, what I see continuously in therapy, not just in the South Asian community, is having to accept that I need help. That shame that exists about having to go to therapy, that's still such a big problem that I see with people. It's almost like people have a misconception, and that's why I'm trying to do these videos. So I don't know which video you saw on Instagram, but I'm trying to tackle some of these issues that people have about therapy. Because I think when people think about therapy, they think fundamentally there has to be something massively wrong with me. There has to be something like so profoundly wrong with me that I need a diagnosis to access therapy. I think people are still struggling with the basic idea of you don't need to have something wrong with you. You don't need to have a diagnosis. You can just go and talk to someone. You can just go and have that neutral space, because a therapeutic space is a neutral space that you're not going to get with your friends. You're not going to get that with your family. You're not going to get that at work. As much as, you might get a few sessions with HR, but that's limited. Now, going to someone and speaking to someone very, very neutrally, that's not something we are very good at understanding we can have and that we're entitled to, and that it's okay. It's absolutely fine. We don't need to have something like wrong with us. And that's also the other perception, that there is something wrong with you. It's more about what has happened to you that has led to this, rather than what's wrong with you. What are you coming with that's not normal, that's abnormal, that's not functioning? We don't talk in that language. That's so unhelpful. And that's more of the kind of the medical model-based diagnosis system, I'd say, that has probably led a lot of people's understanding about mental health difficulties so far. And now with the emergence of more posts of mental health, I think this is being challenged to actually trauma is just about what's going on for you that has affected you. That's it. Let's start from there. And let's give you a safe space and confidential space to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, because you've talked about some of the misconceptions of therapy, and like I think what your account does and what you do is that you go through some of those myths and you tackle some of those stigmas on there. Like, for example, the question I'll ask you now: does everybody need therapy? No, but there's nothing wrong with having a safe space. If people who have gone through difficult life experiences and stressful experiences, and actually it hasn't led to a long-term impact, it hasn't led to a build-up of stress, and they're actually fine with it, do they need therapy? No. Is there anything wrong with having it anyway? No, not necessarily. Not everybody needs therapy. What is need? What does need mean? It's about actually, if we think about it in a very, very clinical way, we think about risk. Like if we think about someone needing therapy, we think about actually, gosh, they need it because they're at risk of hurting themselves or other people, or they're not functioning. Need is just a personal experience, I suppose, that some people have. If they feel that they need to connect with someone who understands them, go for it. Absolutely, go for it. But no, not everybody needs therapy. No. Do you find different trends when people are sitting in front of you, or compared to something where people are asking you questions on social media?
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So, for example, if you've got somebody in front of you that they might still kind of bottle up a lot of things, and it takes a lot of time to kind of unpick some of that information. Whereas if we've got that kind of invisible veil that social media can bring, and they contact you on there, is there a significant difference in terms of what you found?
I'm a little bit boundaried, and I've got more boundaries probably over time with my social media, because what I don't want to do is just give generic advice to someone who I don't really know. Yeah. I don't know their background. I don't know their history. I don't know how they're going to receive the information I get. So what I'm doing at the moment, I don't know how long I can sustain it, but I'm doing this Therapy Thursday thing where people can ask a general question about therapy. And I will try my best to reply to that either in a real or kind of a direct response back to them. And it's got to be a generic one. I don't know about their history, so I can't give much more of a meaning about that. I try not to engage in kind of therapeutic discussions over DM or anything. So if you're serious about therapy, contact me. Either I can see you or I'll refer you to somebody who's excellent and they can see you. But what we do know in therapy is that sometimes I get people in the first session, they want to tell me everything, fill it all out, which is completely understandable because look, suddenly they've got space and someone's listening and they're not judging and, they can talk openly about their experiences. But actually more commonly, especially with trauma, people say it in snippets because actually what's so important in therapy is them trusting me and building up their trust, because a lot of people could come to therapy who have never had a trusting relationship. If anything, they've had only the opposite. They've only been criticized. They've only been told they're rubbish. They've only been hurt and abused or used. And so now this experience of someone actually sitting there and listening to you, and you start to check them out. You start to build up a rapport with them. You start to believe, actually, they can be quite a trusting person. Essentially, we're trying to build that secure base that this person is safe enough to be able to say things openly. So, I mean, even yesterday, or was it the day before, I had a session with someone, I think we were on session 17, and they only just opened up about something that was deeply shameful for them, because that's the power of shame that a lot of my clients come with. It takes time. It's like an onion, peeling back the layers before someone gets fully comfortable. So I don't know about the issues, whether they're the same or not. It's just that I just tend to be more boundaried for the safety of my clients, for the safety of random people who are contacting me, for my own safety as well. I don't want to be giving advice to someone who's, it's just wrong for them.
Do you have, obviously anonymously and professionally in that way, do you have memories of particular cases which stand out for you and the lessons learned from it, or
if for myself? Or...
Yeah, for yourself, yeah.
That's a tough question. I probably needed preparation time on that
one. Oh, it's okay.
Probably inevitably, I think every case that you see, they're going to stay in your mind because you have developed a connection with that person. It is a form of a relationship, isn't it, that you develop with that person? And inevitably, in order to be the best therapist I can be, I try to learn lessons from it. So I try to take points from it that I could maybe have asked certain questions sooner. I could either have gone a different angle. I think you constantly, and that's the point of psychology, we're constantly reflecting and learning on what's going to enhance me as a therapist, and what's going to be best for the next client who comes through with that kind of presentation.
Yeah, I was where it was going to kind of lead up to the next point, which I'll get to, which is around kind of emotional burnout. And I always, even to this day, the case is like 20 years old, and I always remember it's always a Friday evening. It was a Friday evening, and I was working in the custody block then as a drug worker, and a young girl comes in. She was caught for shoplifting, funding a heroin habit, was sort of like I think she was about 8 months pregnant, using cannabis in order to help kind of medicate, antenatal. That's what she was being told by her boyfriend, who was also pimping her out, domestic violence, all these kind of things. And even to this day, I always reflect back, and you can only concentrate at that time to see what help and support that you're able to do at that bit to kind of maximize it. Yeah. But sometimes I always think about, whatever happened to her, and where it goes through.
Yeah.
When you in the height of it, I was seeing quite a lot of people all this time, and particularly I want to say point out, it was before I was married or had any kids, so I had more of that bandwidth for emotional kind of burden. I was able to kind of take what I felt out. As you get married, as you do, they build a family, and that bandwidth kind of got smaller. I experienced that emotional burnout where I was like, I just couldn't take any more calls about my husband, my daughter's taking cocaine, and can you signpost me to a service? How do you cope with your emotional well-being and combating that burnout?
I think I try to be very attentive to it, and I recognize it, and I try to recognize what's causing it. And I think it's definitely happened over a few times. So I think the peak of it for me was probably, I've got 3 children, so it was after my 3rd child, and I was still working in the NHS in a full-time job. And there was that real like, oh, how do I do this? I've got a full-time job, I've got 3 kids at home. I can't. It just felt like, and the NHS was getting really hard to work in. It's notoriously, I think it's a very difficult place, and I think it's getting increasingly difficult. So I made a decision then, actually, I need to sidestep. I want to go into a practice where I can build my own timetable, where I can kind of just be a bit more flexible with things. So that's where I sidestepped into private practice. So it was just being aware of the tension I was experiencing then. And then same thing, I think when I started in private practice, I was so open and eager to see anyone really, because I had such a diverse background in my clinical experience in terms of the severity and risk and all of that. And then over time, it was just noticing that actually working with clients who were really, really risky, or working with people who were really self-harming, actually it was causing stress for me that would spill out into home life, that would be like, oh God, I'm really worrying about the person. And slowly I've kind of just tried to cut down who I'm seeing. So I won't, personality disorders, for example, although I'm happy to work with people who have that diagnosis and they're feeling like quite on top of it. I'm less likely to work with people who are very, very, self-harming, or they're being very narcissistic, for example. They've kind of been very challenging in a relationship. I'm ready to work with people who are ready to work, basically, essentially. So it's me constantly checking in myself about what's causing emotional stress. A big key for me is if it's spilling out into my home life and it's spilling out into my time with kids, and my concentration's not there with kids, then that's a trigger for me. Then I need to look actually what's causing that. Which part of my practice is causing me stress that it's spilling out over to that. So I try to actually create a practice. I think I've created a practice now that is feeling comfortable, it's feeling good, it's feeling like it's manageable. And it's doing things that we all have to do. I think it's important as therapists that we use our own strategies and techniques. And it is about moving the body, it is about getting those walks in, it is about that connection with my family. But if I feel like my mind's going in overdrive, I think it's really important to sit and observe what's the narrative that is existing in my mind. So I really believe in this idea of being a distanced observer to the mind. We all have that really irritating inner voice. Sometimes it's just it goes on auto, doesn't it? It's kind of, we're used to it. But I think learning to observe that has been a skill that I've developed. I'm continuing to develop, and I think it's something I absolutely talk to my clients about. But I think it's so important to listen to that and which bits of that are causing stress or pain points for you, because actually then we get caught in some unhelpful loops with that. It's about trying to pull back from that and challenge it, or just kind of let it go. So that's really about being very self-aware, I suppose, and reflective.
Is there any sort of hints and tips that you can give around kind of coping strategies in terms of what you find beneficial in your experience?
Or how to manage with stress?
I mean, is there anything kind of like generic thing that people can do that can?
So many things, I think, we've got to think about the different points of intervention. So physically, you think about your body. We often forget that when we're talking about therapy, but actually if you notice over time, we can start tensing up, we can start really, really stressing and holding pain in our body. And there's a great book actually by Dr. Gabor Mate, I think it's When the Body Says No, if I've got that right, that talks all about the impact on your mental health and your physical health because of emotional pain and early attachment difficulty. So when we know the body massively stores our stress and tension. So work on your body, that's huge. That's a really, really massive thing that people need to do. We need to learn to be in tune with our body and to find a way for it to heal. So that's just basically exercises, yoga, walking, stretching, all of those basic things. I think trying to also, for the mental side of things, it really is learning. The first thing is learning that you need to try to be more aware. So many people are led by their minds. So many people just go on auto, just kind of doing what it's telling you to do. So even this idea that I'm saying now, some people might be thinking, what the heck is she on about? And it's just learning to pay attention. And I think what is useful for that, it could be meditation. It could be Simran, if that works for some people. It could be just taking that 5-10 minutes at a certain point in the day that works for you to just sit and reflect, like, what are the main things that my mind's been telling me today? to try to create a sense of distance from the narrative. That takes time. I'm not gonna lie, it takes time, but it is important to do. Another thing I think is developing values that are important to you that can also help with steering you where you're going. So again, a lot of people are kind of in a routine where they're kind of just doing, and they're not really so I see this quite often with my clients. They're kind of really successful. They've got the 9 to 5, they've got the job, they've got the kids, the wife and the car and all of that. But they're so unhappy. They're so unfulfilled. And when we go into it, it's actually they haven't really ever thought about their core values. What's important to you? Like really, what's going to give you a sense of yes, I've achieved that. That makes sense. That makes me feel like I'm online with where I'm going. And values are different from goals. We're very good at goals. We're not so good at values. So I think thinking a bit more objectively like that. I know these are quite deep tips I'm giving you.
No. This is useful because like obviously where people are going to be interpreting this in their own scenarios as well. So like the more detail the better, because I think for a lot of people is that they don't know where to go to get some of this information. So what you're giving is really useful.
Yeah, I think a quick win is thinking about, when we triggered. I think the quick wins are when we're thinking about our trigger points. So when we have an incident where we argue with our spouse, or we're kind of stressed with the kids, or we argue at work, we're feeling really stressed, get really good at going back into it. What I mean by that is that when you are stressed, something else takes over. Your anger takes over, your emotions take over, and you kind of lose that rational thinking ability during that peak moment of stress. And you're going to come out of it naturally. So it's like the bell curve, isn't it? You go up, you hit the peak, and then you start coming down. And quite soon after you come down, I want you to get good at being removed enough from that peak point that you can look back at it. So don't be so close to it that you're still stressed. Don't be so far removed from it that you can't remember it. Get good at getting that sweet spot where you can go back and you can sit down and you can really think about what the heck was going on for me there. Why did I end up doing that? Because I didn't want to act like that. I didn't want to say those things. I didn't want to, respond in that way. So what happened to me? And what you'll often find is when you break that down, and a lot of therapists listening to this, or a lot of people who know about CBT will understand what I'm saying. What I'm essentially saying is go through and analyze your thoughts. Go through, look at the situation, try and figure out what was the trigger thought for you. Try and figure out what really changed it for you. And often what you'll find after a few incidents of recording this, you'll start finding a theme. You'll start finding something about, I felt, I don't know, that person was laughing at me. I felt that person didn't respect me. I felt that person's taking a piss. They were taking advantage of me. You'll find something that's quite triggering for you. That's a little bit of a raw nerve. And there are two things you can do about that. One, I would say, is communicate that to the other person if you can, if you've got that relationship. Actually, when you talk about this is what is triggered in me. But the other thing is massively your job, isn't it? It's about taking autonomy. It's taking direction over that. It's about doing something about that. You need to work on that because that's come from somewhere. What has led to you feeling like people are taking advantage of you? Probably a belief that you don't feel like you're worthy or you're good enough. So we call them core beliefs. We call them those really deeply held beliefs that we have about ourselves that we try really hard to protect, but actually they get triggered really, really easily when we're in that situation. So I think that's really a big one. That's a big one to start kind of reflecting on.
Sort of related onto it, I ran a really unofficial, not evidence-based sort of poll in my lads WhatsApp groups, and I said, I'm speaking to somebody. What is the thing that you would what would you want to know about, basically? Obviously it was a little bit more spicy language because we're in a lads WhatsApp group, so it was a bit different. So the two common themes that came out, and this is between like 50 people within there, was two things really came out quick. I was really one, I wasn't really surprised because I kind of suffer from it as well, which was the anxiety. And the other one was about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I want to start with imposter syndrome and then work towards anxiety. Can you just give us a little bit about what imposter syndrome is and some of the ways around it?
Imposter syndrome is a term that's been flagged up more recently, isn't it? In the last couple of years, it's really, really grown to describe people who are just really not feeling good enough, or not feeling like they're qualified enough to do the job that they are doing. They're not feeling like they should be the ones doing the thing that they are expected to do. I think essentially it's always been there. I think essentially it's just a sense of self-doubt. Again, it's that inner critic, it's that inner voice telling you something that is not true. Where is that coming from? It probably is related a little bit to anxiety, if I'm honest, because this inner voice that we all have is massively protective of us. It doesn't want us to do too much. I don't know if you would agree with this, but if we're going to do something new, if we're going to do something like go to an interview, or we go to a presentation, we go to meet this new person, we start feeling anxious, and there are thoughts that creep in. Should I just not do it? Should I just hold back from that? Should I just cancel it? Should I just say I'm sick? That we all have that narrative. And a part of that is actually, you know what? You're not really good enough to do that. You shouldn't be the person doing this. You should hold back from that. We can go into that through extra preparing and being the best we possibly can. And that leads to perfectionism. And that's basically an overcompensation, which isn't necessarily a good thing, because we'll burn out from that. That's not the best approach to take. It gets us results, and that's why people keep doing it, but it's not, I would say, the healthiest coping strategy. Or we go into it obviously by challenging some of it and just hearing that voice, hearing and understanding that it's there. The voice is there, as I said, to keep us safe from potentially getting into a situation that might be threatening to us. There's something quite essential about this inner voice that almost, it just wants to keep you stuck. It wants to keep you where you are at, for fear of you falling out and falling into a danger zone. Anything that is different from the current situation is deemed as threatening by the mind, unfortunately. That's just our makeup. That's just the way we are. It's a threat response we still have carried over from when we were, primitive species, that translates now into the work situation, or kind of the social environment where doing something new is deemed as threatening.
Wow. I think where it came from, and I did ask a couple of people, and they're fairly open in it, was actually around a new job environment, where I think a lot of people have got new jobs over the COVID period, lockdown period, and doing everything remotely, not necessarily having that physical kind of contact, none of that social sangat, for example, and then getting jobs where they didn't think they had a chance, and that self-esteem, the self-doubt sort of kicks in. And I think from what you said actually makes quite a lot of sense, where you've got that comfort zone that you don't really want to go experiment and jump into another area, but you're in there now, and you've got the label, you've got the job title, you've got the salary, you've got this, and then they find it really difficult to try and demonstrate some of those skills, even though they are doing it. It is that sometimes that voice is probably getting a little bit louder time and time again.
I wonder a lot. I wonder about men in your group and where that has come from for them, because I suppose some of the men I'm thinking of who I've seen from South Asian communities, actually not, most men I see, non-South Asian as well, they will come with this quite strongly. And if we break it down and we think about actually where has that voice originated, so we've already established that it's to keep you safe. And safe means familiar, it means and it means like don't disrupt that, because this is okay. You don't want to go too far out of that. Where has the voice come from saying that actually, you don't want to go into the danger zone, you won't cope? That often comes, I think, from some messages we've picked up over time. And that can be going back through your history and finding out, well, where are those kind of critical voices? And it could be very direct critical voices, or they can be a little bit more subtle. So it could be just being a minority in this country, there's been something that's filtered through in terms of actually, you're only worth so much, you can only do so much. And again, I've seen some South Asian men I've worked with who are now quite senior, middle-aged, but they had a hard time getting through up to that level. They will talk about racism and difference. It's not as prevalent now, it is, but not in the same way. But it can come from maybe school, it can come from friends, it can come from early voices like mum and dad. It can come from actually, what does your dad believe about himself? Does he believe he's good enough? Does he believe that he should just stay in that safe zone? Was he someone who took risks, or is he someone who kind of stayed in that safe place? It can come through that indirectly, just learning a message about what's the right thing to do or not. So I think that would be the kind of analysis, or maybe the thoughts that they would want to start exploring, really.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no clear answer for it. I was just looking at the kind of makeup as you were discussing. A lot of professionals, business owners who've got it. I think it virtually 98% married kids. Maybe as you're getting older, the responsibility gets more.
Yeah.
Absolutely no basis on what I'm just saying. It's just looking at the makeup of the groups, and whether that is a relationship or not, I don't know. But a lot of people did get new jobs coming in within there. Maybe that's had an effect on it. In terms of when we looked at the anxiety side of it, like this is I think that I found is, even with this podcast, I started from absolutely nothing, didn't give a shit, just done it, just chilling. And then like now getting messages, well, who's on the next one? Who's this? And I'm like, this was not the idea and not the plan. And this is the byproduct of that. It starts building up that, I've got a plan for next week. I've got to do this, to the point where I've always made a deal. If I don't enjoy it, that's it. I'm pulling out. Do you find that the anxiety or the word itself is becoming more and more kind of commonplace in terms of people having these issues?
Anxiety, I think we're getting better at labeling it. I think we're getting better at understanding our anxiety. I think a point that you raised earlier of actually, are we just overly relying on it? Are we kind of using this language too much? That's probably also there as well. I'm not going to lie, because I think there's this thing like, it's kind of like Insta-therapy, isn't it? Where actually everything is trauma, or everything is related to ADHD, or everything is related to narcissism. And I think, oh my gosh, we've got to be careful of that, And I think we don't want to become de-skilled. We don't want to become all about us. Like everybody needs to meet our needs. Everybody needs to do things for us. And if someone's challenging, I've got to get them out of my life. I would be very cautious with this Insta-therapy information that we are being fed. And I think it's very, very careful to keep thinking about what you can do, what you can learn, what you can change, how you can grow when you're in a difficult situation. Of course, if someone's being abusive, of course, if there's risk involved, you need to get yourself into safety. Of course you do. But outside of that, the rest is surely, what can I learn from this relationship? How can I grow into this? So yeah, I think anxiety, we're getting better at it. We're getting better at describing it and labeling and identifying it. Possibly our anxiety is going up because this world that we live in now is crazy. We were expected to do so much all of the time. We can't really have hobbies. You've got to kind of monetize them and do all these things.
That's the point, isn't it? Like monetizing it. Like interestingly, I was having a conversation with my 5-year-old, and he was talking about some of the videos that he's watching, and he goes, "Oh, how many likes and subscribers have you got for this?" And then I was like, "Oh, it doesn't need anything." And then he was the funniest thing he said. He was in a Jazzy B video recently, and I was chatting. It was hilarious because we filmed that on a Friday. Saturday, I took him to watch Man United, and he saw Ronaldo, which is his hero at this point. And then Sunday, we're getting him ready to go to school. And then he goes, "Oh, I'm not going to school." I was like, "Well, what do you mean you ain't going to school?" He goes, "I'm famous now. I mean, I'm on YouTube. I've got likes. I've got this." And I was like, his relationship with success came with this social media. And then I was like, imagine the next level of that, where you've got a lot of the TikTokers and all these bit who kind of involved, and that social media anxiety sort of kicking in, that fake Insta life, that perfection life. I mean, this is kind of new uncharted territory in some ways. Are you worried about the next generation of kids coming through or anything like that?
Oh, I worry so much about young people nowadays and what they're being exposed to. Not even just young people. I think older people like us. I don't know how old you are, but I think we're kind of roughly around the same. I think it's hard because we're just exposed to this new way of life that keeps telling us we should be better. And it doesn't leave us alone. It's there all the time. We can access it as we're going to bed. We can access it in between, I don't know, work breaks. We can, the stuff that we used to do historically. It's so funny. I tell my kids, there was a time where, when I was at school, I didn't have access. There was no internet. If I wanted to learn something, I had to go to the library to get a book and come back. It was hard. It was hard stuff. But now with internet at our fingertips and this pressure to know everything and be everything, and I think it's massively worrying. And we're losing the importance and ability to step away from it, because now everything's on our phones, even our banking, even our, everything, shopping lists or whatever, everything can be on that screen. And we are losing the belief, I think, that we need to step away from it, that it's important to actually put your phone down, that it's important to connect and look at people in the eyes when you're talking to them, rather than just keep looking at your phone and kind of talking to them. It's really scary. And I think that there will be effects from it inevitably, because we're just losing how to connect to people. We're becoming more confident with being that social persona.
Yeah, I get as we've been doing this podcast, I was getting more kind of reflective in terms of what you do. I think naturally, obviously, when you talk about things, it's triggering emotions, conversations, and my kids, they have an impression of me where I'm always on my phone. And when you were talking about having that downtime where you're having that specific time for children and things, I think that's becoming more and more, because the way that they look at stuff is looking at screens as well themselves now, and it's just art imitating life, or life imitating art. It's exactly the same in terms of what's happening. And I think I definitely have to readdress that relationship that I have with technology, because it is passing on. But what doesn't help is when they go to school, the first thing that they see is screens as well.
Screens, isn't it? But we're normalizing it, and I think
Yeah.
that's the skills that we have now within our own families. So I suppose I think a lot about, and I encourage people to think about what they can do in their own units, in their own families, in their own relationships for themselves, because that's where the change is going to happen. And it is now about normalizing or making a bit of a rule about it. That actually, I'm going to spend these 2 hours in the evening. We all know this stuff, but it's doing it. It's the doing. It's the commitment to it. That I'm going to spend the 2 hours, just put my phone aside, and I'm going to play with my kids. I'm going to look at my kids. I'm going to read to them. I don't want them to forget this. I don't want them to forget how to write, because now it's about typing. I think it's just we've got to hold on to these really important, skills that I think inevitably they're going to start fading.
I'm going to kind of bring it to a close and ask you a couple of questions, and then have a bit of a free space for the final one. One is around, how do you find a good therapist?
It's a hard question. I'm not going to lie, Ricky. It's a really hard question, and I didn't realize it was so hard until I volunteered to find a therapist for one of my clients' sisters, because she was really struggling. And oh my gosh, it's hard. If you go, this isn't a plug at all, but I have done some videos on this that gives you certain therapist directories to check out. Also, I think it's very much about identifying what it is that you need, because what does good mean? Good can mean different to me. It can mean different for you. Does good mean a certain amount of experience? Does good mean a certain amount of training? Does good mean registered? And that should always be absolutely fundamental. Please go with someone who's registered and trained and qualified to do what they should be doing. And you can check that out. If you want a psychologist, you go for how it is a psychologist registered. It's HCPC. So you can go and look that up. Define what you need. So do you want someone online? Do you want someone face-to-face? Do you want someone from your own background, your own ethnicity, or don't you really care? Do you want someone older than you, same age than you? Do you want someone who's going to kind of be there regularly to talk and have that just safe space to talk? Do you want to be more proactive? Do you want to have, if you've got a problem that you want to work on? Do you want someone who's very compassionate? These are all things that can influence your choice of therapist, but you've got to define what you mean by good. That's the most important thing, first of all. Wow. No, that's not. It's still a lot of work. It is kind of effort, I suppose, to put in there. But the other thing is, it might be a bit of a trial and error approach. You might find someone. It might just be starting with someone and then you figuring that out after a session or two around. Actually, this isn't working for me because, and that's where the reflection bit is really, really important.
Yeah, I always have that trouble with that one, because sometimes it always relates to cost and things like that, where it comes through. And then I think I remember another case once where I was speaking with the family, and there was either an auntie of some sort, which was basically saying, oh, they're superstition, go to this god, go to this place and do this, drink that, eat this, and they'll be fine. And you're always combating that kind of that frustration really at that time.
Clients who come to me with that actually, that there's something wrong with me, maybe I should do therapy, maybe I should go and see that blah, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. So just focus on you first of all. Let's ground you. Let's figure out what the problem is. Let's come back to you, because it's often that they've lost themselves and they're stuck in the whole community approach to things. Let's just focus on you first of all. So yeah, it's real and it exists, unfortunately.
Okay, so this is called the Bandwagon, and this is where I sort of have a conversation with the guests, basically to have their safe space, technically, with them. So, if there's any bandwagon that you like to jump on, this is your opportunity. If there's one to jump off, this is your opportunity. Or is there anything that you want to get off your chest as well? This is also your opportunity.
Oh, definitely should have thought about this one. I just want people to know that they can. That's it. I just want people to know that they can seek help, that they can find a space, that it does exist. I get that money is an issue, especially as a private therapist. I get that money is an issue, but there are other ways you can get around it. Maybe do a group, maybe download a package from someone that can help you work through it. Maybe read some books about the thing that you are struggling with. My aim is to help people move beyond the limits that they are currently into a place of empowerment. So they're not constrained, they're not feeling restrained by, whatever it is that's happened to them. No, and that's it. I think just try to reach out, try to find the space that is going to be best for you. And that's it. I just want to thank you for inviting me along and doing this. I'm glad we finally got to do it.
Yeah. No, it's and that's the offer. If there was anything that's coming out, like hopefully you're writing books, and at some stage,
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you write a book or audio book of some sort. Because I do think that there's so much potential. A podcast for you is just designed. It's just there. You need to do a podcast.
Oh, you're very kind.
And if there was anything from there, I'm definitely going to get you back on something, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of feedback coming back from this. And
I think what would be useful for me to know is actually, how can I help? That's the thing I'm always thinking about. How can I help people who want the help? So if there are any questions or if there are any suggestions about what you guys would like or what you would benefit from, I often think about, should I do a group for men? Should I do this? Should I do that? I don't know. So if there's anything that stands out, let me know.
Thank you, Gurpreet. I really appreciate it. I know time is really, really precious for you as well. And thank you for taking this time out. Thank you.
Thank you.